In the endless white silence of the Verilian expanse, where the wind didn't whistle but screamed its frozen fury, a lone figure trudged through the snowdrifts. His name was Finn O'Connell, a man whose face was etched with the kind of weariness that came not just from the cold, but from a life spent on the fringes of a galaxy that had little use for quiet, honest mechanics. He wasn't a soldier or an explorer. He was just a man trying to get his battered, half-frozen skiff back to the ramshackle outpost of Frosthold after a failed salvage run. His breath plumed in front of him like a ghost, and his boots crunched on the ice with a sound that felt too loud for the vast, empty world. He was lost, low on power, and dangerously low on hope. His thoughts a grim loop of how he'd explain to the outpost's gruff quartermaster that he'd lost another ship. Just as the last of the weak, gray twilight began to bleed from the sky, threatening to plunge the landscape into a night so cold it could freeze a man's soul solid, Finn saw something that didn't belong. It was a dark smudge against the blinding white, huddled at the base of a jagged outcrop of black rock that clawed its way up from the permafrost. At first, he thought it was a dead animal, some unfortunate creature caught in the storm. But then it moved. A tiny, shivering motion that sent a jolt of adrenaline through his exhausted body. He changed course, his heavy steps quickening into a clumsy jog, his heart hammering against his ribs that as he drew closer, the shape resolved into a child. But not a human child. She was small, impossibly fragile-looking, with skin the deep, bruised purple of a twilight sky just before true nightfall. Her hair was a wild tangle of pure, luminous white, dusted with frost and clinging to her thin shoulders. She was wrapped in what looked like scraps of a once fine, silvery fabric, now torn and stained with ice and grime. Her large, almond-shaped eyes, the color of amethyst, were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have burned away all other emotion. She was curled into a tight ball, trying to make herself as small as possible against the relentless cold, her tiny frame racked with silent shivers. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old in human terms. Finn dropped to his knees in the snow beside her, the cold biting through his thick trousers instantly. "Hey there," he said, his voice rough from disuse but deliberately soft, gentle. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The child flinched at the sound, pressing herself harder against the rock. Her eyes darted from his face to the horizon and back again, as if expecting a monster to leap from the snow at any second. He slowly, carefully, unzipped his heavy thermal jacket. The heat escaping from his own body felt like a luxury he couldn't afford to waste, but he didn't hesitate. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering for a moment before gently draping the warm lining over her small form. She was so cold her skin felt like marble. The moment the warmth touched her, a single crystalline tear escaped from her eye and froze instantly on her purple cheek. Her lips, chapped and blue, moved, forming words that were barely a whisper, lost in the moan of the wind. Finn leaned closer, his ear almost touching her frosty hair. "What was that, little one?" he asked, his voice a mere breath. "Mom," Mom said. "Wait here," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. The simple, heartbreaking statement hung in the air between them, heavy with a story Finn could only imagine. She'd been alone for days, waiting in this frozen hell for a mother who clearly wasn't coming back. The sheer, devastating trust in those words, the obedience of a child who had done exactly as she was told, even as the world tried to kill her, pierced Finn's heart like a shard of ice. He felt a lump form in his throat, a fierce, protective anger rising in his chest against whoever had left her here. He knew he couldn't leave her, not for a second. His own survival was now tied to hers. "Well, your mom's not here right now," Finn said, forcing a calmness he didn't feel into his voice. "But I am, and I'm getting you out of here." He carefully scooped her up. She was lighter than he expected, a bundle of bone and fear wrapped in his jacket. She didn't fight him, but she didn't relax either, her body rigid with tension. He held her close to his chest, trying to share his body heat, and turned back towards the faint, distant glow he hoped was Frosthold. The journey back was a blur of pain and determination. Every step was agony in the deepening cold, his own energy reserves plummeting. The child, whose name he still didn't know, remained silent, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing shallow and rapid. He talked to her constantly, a stream of nonsense about his skiff, about the terrible coffee at Frosthold, about the time he'd fixed a plasma conduit with nothing but chewing gum and hope. He needed to keep her awake, to keep her fighting. He needed to remind her she wasn't alone anymore. Hours later, when the squat, fortified buildings of Frosthold finally emerged from the swirling snow like beached metal whales, Finn was half delirious with exhaustion and cold. He stumbled through the main airlock, kicking it shut behind him with his boot, and collapsed onto the heated floor of the common room. The sudden blast of warm, recycled air was a physical shock. A few off-worlders and locals looked up from their drinks, their expressions shifting from annoyance to surprise and then to concern as they saw the small, purple-skinned figure in his arms. A woman with a no-nonsense braid and a medic's patch on her sleeve was at his side in an instant. "By the stars, Finn! What in the void is this?" she exclaimed, her professional mask slipping for a moment to reveal genuine shock. "I found her, out in the expanse," Finn gasped, his teeth chattering. "She's been alone for days. Her name? I don't know her name." The medic, whose name was Rena, gently took the child from him. The girl's eyes snapped open, wide with panic, and she let out a small, terrified whimper, reaching a trembling hand back towards Finn. "No! Him! Stay!" she cried, her voice stronger now, laced with desperate fear. "It's all right, sweetheart," Rena soothed, her voice instantly softening. "He's not going anywhere. We're just going to get you warm." But the child wouldn't be calmed. Her amethyst eyes locked on Finn with an intensity that was both heartbreaking and unnerving. Finn, despite his own shaking limbs, pushed himself up and followed them to the small medical bay attached to the outpost. He sat on a stool in the corner, watching as Rena worked with practiced efficiency, hooking the girl up to a bioscanner and wrapping her in heated blankets. The scanner chirped, displaying a complex series of glyphs and readings that meant nothing to Finn, but Rena's frown deepened. "She's Virelian, that's for sure," Rena muttered, more to herself than to Finn. "But these genetic markers, they're off the charts. And her core temperature was critical. Another hour out there?" She trailed off, shaking her head. She looked at Finn, her expression a mixture of awe and suspicion. "You saved her life, Finn. That's a miracle out there." The child, whom Rena had started calling Lyra after a soft, musical hum she made, finally began to relax under the warmth and care. Her shivering subsided, and the terrifying rigidity in her small body eased. She kept her eyes on Finn, though, as if he were her only anchor in a world that had betrayed her. After a while, her eyelids grew heavy, but just before sleep claimed her, she whispered his name, a word she must have heard him say to himself during their trek. "Finn!" He managed a weak smile. "That's right, Lyra. Go to sleep. You're safe now." For the next 2 days, Finn barely left the medical bay. He slept on the hard cot next to hers, waking at every small sound she made. He learned that she ate very little, picking at nutrient paste with a look of profound distaste, but she would drink water greedily. She spoke in short, broken sentences, her voice still a fragile whisper. She told him her mother's name was Serial, and that they had been running from the hunters. She described a sleek, silver ship that had been shot down, crashing far from here. She'd been hidden in the rocks while her mother went to find help. That was 4 days ago. Finn's heart ached for her. He was a simple man, used to fixing engines, not dealing with the trauma of a lost alien child. But he found a strange sense of purpose in caring for her. He whittled her a small toy from a piece of scrap wood, a clumsy bird that looked more like a potato with wings. Her first real smile, a small, tentative thing that lit up her entire face, was worth more to him than any credit chip in the galaxy. On the 3rd day, as Lyra was sitting up in bed, her color much improved, a new worry began to gnaw at Finn. He'd been so focused on her immediate survival that he hadn't considered the larger implications. Who were these hunters? Why were they after a woman and her child? And what would happen if they tracked Lyra to Frosthold? The outpost was a haven for smugglers, prospectors, and those who wanted to be left alone. but it wasn't a fortress. It wouldn't stand against a determined military force. His fears were confirmed that evening. He was in the common room, trying to negotiate a price for a new power cell for his skiff, when the main comm panel on the wall crackled to life. The image of a man in a crisp, severe uniform flickered onto the screen. His face was sharp, his eyes cold and calculating, and his skin held a faint, sickly greenish hue. Behind him, the bridge of a warship was visible, all harsh lines and glowing consoles. "This is Commander Vrax of the kYeah hegemony," the man's voice boomed, devoid of any warmth. "We are tracking a fugitive vessel that crashed in your sector. Aboard was a dangerous political dissident and her offspring. We have reason to believe the child survived and may have sought refuge in your settlement. We demand you surrender the child immediately. Failure to comply will be seen as an act of war against the hegemony. You have 1 hour to comply." The message cut out, leaving a stunned silence in the common room. All eyes turned to Finn. He felt a cold dread, colder than the Verilian expanse, settle in his stomach. He looked at Rena, who stood by the bar, her face pale. "kYeah hegemony," she breathed. "They're slavers. They conquer worlds, strip them of resources, and enslave the populations. If that child is a dissident's daughter, she's not just a refugee, she's a prize." Finn didn't think. He just moved. He rushed back to the medical bay, his mind racing. Lyra was awake, her eyes wide with the same terror he'd seen in the snow. She must have heard the broadcast. "They're coming, aren't they?" she whispered, her small hands clutching the blanket. "Yes," Finn said, his voice firm. "But they're not taking you." He looked around the small room, his mechanic's mind assessing their options. His skiff was in the hangar, but it was barely space-worthy. It would never outrun a hegemony cruiser. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He grabbed a heavy-duty thermal blanket and wrapped it around Lyra. "We're leaving. Now." He scooped her up again, and she buried her face in his neck, her small body trembling not from cold, but from fear. He slipped out of the medical bay and into the service corridors of the outpost, avoiding the main thoroughfares. He knew these back ways well. He'd fixed enough busted pipes and faulty wiring to have mapped them all in his head. His goal was the old mining tunnels that ran beneath Frosthold, a labyrinth from the planet's brief, failed gold rush a century ago. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. As they navigated the dim, metallic corridors, the klaxon alarm began to wail throughout the outpost. A deep, mournful sound that signaled an external threat. The hegemony ship was here, reaching a rusted hatch marked Sector 7 decommissioned. Finn pried it open with a crowbar he kept in his tool belt. The stale, cold air from the tunnel below washed over them. He climbed down a rickety ladder, holding Lyra securely with one arm, and helped her down after him. The darkness was absolute, smelling of damp earth and ancient metal. He switched on his wrist lamp, its beam cutting a narrow path ahead. They had only gone a few hundred meters when the ground above them shook with a tremendous boom. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The hegemony wasn't negotiating. They were attacking. Blaster fire echoed faintly through the rock, a staccato rhythm of violence. Finn's heart pounded in his chest. He had to get Lyra deeper, further away. Suddenly, Lyra stiffened in his arms. She lifted her head, her amethyst eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She pointed down a side tunnel, her voice a sharp, urgent whisper. "This way. I hear them. In my head." Finn hesitated for only a second. He trusted her. He turned down the tunnel she indicated, which sloped steeply downward. The air grew colder, and the walls became smoother, less like a mine and more like a natural cave. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by an eerie, subterranean silence. After what felt like an hour, they emerged into a vast cavern. In the center, illuminated by a soft, internal light, was a ship. But it wasn't a mining vessel or a freighter. It was organic, its hull a smooth, pearlescent white that seemed to breathe, covered in intricate, glowing patterns that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. It was beautiful and utterly alien. Lyra wriggled out of his arms and ran towards it, her small feet making no sound on the stone floor. She placed her palm against the hull, and a section of the ship irised open with a sigh, revealing a softly lit interior. She turned back to Finn, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and fear. "It's my father's ship," she said. "He hid it here long ago. Mom knew the way." Finn stared, his mind reeling. This changed everything. This wasn't just a refugee child. She was the daughter of someone important enough to possess a ship like this. He walked towards her, his boots echoing in the huge space. "Can it fly?" he asked, his voice filled with a new kind of hope. Lyra nodded, a small, serious expression on her face. "It knows me. It will listen." She held out her hand to him. "Come on, Finn. We have to go." He took her small, cool hand in his, and together they stepped into the living ship. The door sealed behind them, and the interior lights brightened. The ship hummed to life, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from its very bones. Control panels, formed of the same pearlescent material, glowed into existence before them, displaying a star map Finn couldn't read. But Lyra seemed to understand it perfectly. She climbed into what looked like a pilot's cradle, and the ship's systems flowed around her like liquid light. Outside, the sounds of the hegemony assault grew louder, closer. They were searching the tunnels. There was no more time. Lyra closed her eyes, concentrating, her small brow furrowed in intense focus. The ship lifted from the cavern floor without a sound, gliding upwards with impossible grace. It shot through the tunnel they'd entered from, moving faster than Finn thought possible, and burst out of a hidden vent on the surface, high above the besieged Frosthold from their vantage point. Finn could see the hegemony cruiser hovering menacingly over the outpost, its weapons batteries glowing ominously. Smaller attack skiffs buzzed around it like angry insects. But their ship, this living vessel, was already accelerating, climbing into the upper atmosphere with a speed that left his stomach in his boots. The stars appeared, sharp and clear, and then they were in the silent void of space. Lyra slumped back in her cradle, exhausted but triumphant. She looked at Finn, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "We did it?" she whispered. Finn, looking out at the infinite black, felt a wave of relief so profound it was dizzying. But it was quickly followed by a new question, one that loomed as large as the galaxy itself. "Where do we go now?" He was a mechanic from a backwater outpost, holding the hand of a purple-skinned alien child who was clearly far more than she seemed. He had saved her from the snow, but their journey was far from over. The hunters knew her face, knew her name. They would not stop. He looked at Lyra, her white hair floating slightly in the ship's artificial gravity, her amethyst eyes trusting and full of a courage that belied her age. He had promised her she was safe. He would find a way to keep that promise, no matter where the stars led them. For the first time in his life, Finn O'Connell wasn't just fixing things. He was part of a story that was just beginning. A story written in starlight and shadow, with a small, brave girl as its heart. He squeezed her hand, a silent vow passing between them in the quiet hum of the living ship as it carried them into the unknown. The living ship, which Lyra called the Whisper, sailed through the silent ocean of stars, its pearlescent hull shimmering with an inner light. Finn, still reeling from their escape, watched the starfield blur into streaks of light as they entered a faster-than-light corridor. The quiet hum of the vessel was a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind on the frozen world below. He looked at Lyra, who was now asleep in her cradle, her small face peaceful for the first time since he'd found her. He allowed himself a moment of exhausted relief. Their destination, Lyra had murmured before sleep took her, was the Azure Nebula, a place her mother had spoken of as a sanctuary, a neutral zone beyond the reach of the kYeah hegemony. It was a 3-day journey, and for 2 of those days, peace reigned aboard the Whisper. Finn learned to navigate its organic corridors, finding a small chamber that provided food, nutrient-rich gels that tasted faintly of berries, and another that served as a surprisingly comfortable sleeping area. He spent his time watching over Lyra, mending a tear in his jacket, and trying to understand the strange, intuitive controls of the ship. It responded to thought and touch more than to physical levers or buttons, a technology so advanced it felt like magic. On the third day, as the swirling blues and violets of the Azure Nebula began to fill the view screen, the tranquility shattered. A proximity alarm, a soft chime that quickly escalated to a frantic pulse, echoed through the ship. Finn rushed to the command cradle where Lyra was already awake, her amethyst eyes wide with a fear that was all too familiar. "Hegemony Patrol," she whispered, her voice tight. "A scout frigate. They must have tracked our energy signature from the jump." Finn's blood ran cold. He peered at the view screen. A sleek, predatory vessel, all sharp angles and gunmetal gray, was decelerating from warp speed directly in their path. It was smaller than the cruiser that had attacked Frosthold, but it was still a warship, bristling with weapons. Their tiny, beautiful ship was no match for it in a fight. "We can't outrun it," Finn said, his mind racing. "And we can't hide in this nebula. Their sensors will cut through the gas." Lyra bit her lip, her small hands clenched into fists. "The Whisper is fast, but not that fast. My father, he built in a failsafe." She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. The ship's interior lights dimmed, and the glowing patterns on the walls shifted, turning from a calming blue to a deep, urgent red. "It's a short-range quantum slip. It will take us a few light years off course, but it's our only chance." "Do it," Finn said without hesitation. Lyra placed her palms flat on the console before her. The ship gave a violent lurch, and for a terrifying second, Finn felt his very atoms being pulled apart. Then, just as suddenly, they were back in normal space, the Azure Nebula gone, replaced by the unfamiliar star patterns of a different sector. But their relief was short-lived. The view screen flickered, showing a damage report. The quantum slip had overloaded the main power conduit. The ship was losing life support. "We have to land," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "There's a Class M planet on our scanners. It's our only option." The planet was a world of emerald forests and vast, sapphire oceans, a paradise from orbit. But as they descended through the atmosphere, a new problem arose. The planet was already occupied, not by a primitive civilization, but by a sprawling, technologically advanced city whose architecture was a blend of gleaming chrome and living, bioluminescent flora. This was no backwater. It was a major hub. The Galactic Concord. Lyra breathed, her eyes filled with a new kind of dread. "It's one of their charter worlds. They're neutral, but they have treaties with everyone, including the hegemony." The Whisper, damaged and unregistered, was a massive anomaly. Before they could even choose a landing site, a squadron of sleek, white interceptor craft swarmed them, their formation perfect and menacing. A calm, authoritative voice came over the calm, unidentified vessel. "You are in violation of Concord airspace. Power down your engines and prepare for boarding. Failure to comply will result in your immediate destruction." They were trapped. If they surrendered to the Concord, they would be processed, their identities scanned. Lyra's genetic signature would be flagged instantly, and she would be handed over to the hegemony as a fugitive. If they resisted, they would be shot down. There was no good choice. Finn looked at Lyra, then at the interceptors on the screen. He was just a mechanic. He didn't know galactic politics or how to outmaneuver a fleet. But he knew machines, and he knew this ship was alive. An idea, desperate and insane, began to form in his mind. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Can you make the ship pretend to be dead? Like a hibernation state? Shut down everything except minimal life support?" Lyra's eyes widened. I think so. Father taught me about its defensive protocols. It can mimic a derelict." "It's our only shot," Finn said. "We let them board. We let them think we're just survivors of a crash. You're my niece, a human girl who got caught in a pirate raid. We lost our parents. We're just scared kids looking for help." It was a flimsy story, but it was all they had. Lyra nodded, her small face set with determination. She placed her hands on the console again, and the Whisper's lights went dark. The gentle hum ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. The ship's vital signs on the internal monitors flatlined, leaving only a faint, almost imperceptible pulse to keep them alive. The boarding party came minutes later, tall, humanoid figures in pristine white armor, their faces obscured by smooth, featureless helmets. They moved with efficient military precision, sweeping the organic corridors with energy rifles. They found Finn and Lyra huddled together in the sleeping chamber, shivering in the cold, the picture of helpless refugees. Their leader, a man with silver insignia on his shoulder pauldron, removed his helmet. His face was stern but not unkind, his eyes a sharp, intelligent gray. He introduced himself as Captain Eris Thorn of the Galactic Concord Peacekeeping Fleet. Finn stuck to their story, his voice rough with fear he didn't have to fake. He spoke of pirates, of a freighter being torn apart, of grabbing his niece and fleeing in an old escape pod that crash-landed here. He kept his tale simple, his emotions raw and believable. He held Lyra close, and she played her part perfectly, burying her face in his chest, her small body shaking with silent sobs, her purple skin hidden under a layer of grime and a heavy blanket Finn had wrapped around her. Captain Thorn listened, his gaze flicking between them, his expression unreadable. He ordered a medical scan. Finn's heart stopped. This was it. The scanner would see through their ruse in an instant. But the device the medic used was a standard, broad-spectrum bioscanner, designed to check for common diseases and injuries, not to perform a deep genetic analysis. It beeped, showing 2 human life signs, both stressed and malnourished, but otherwise stable. The medic gave a curt nod. Just scared and cold, Captain. No signs of contagion. Thorn studied them for a long moment, his gray eyes seeming to look right through Finn's soul. Then, to Finn's immense relief, he gave a short nod. You're lucky you landed in our sector. The Azure Expanse is crawling with kYeah patrols. They're hunting for a missing asset, a Virelian child of high importance. Finn forced his face to show only confusion and fear. Virelian? We've never heard of them, sir. We just want to get to a safe port, maybe find some family on New Terra. Thorn's gaze lingered on Lyra for a heartbeat too long. New Terra is a long way from here, he said slowly. For your own safety, you'll be taken to our processing center in the capital city. From there, we can arrange passage for you. It wasn't freedom, but it was a reprieve. They were escorted onto a Concord shuttle, leaving the seemingly dead Whisper behind. As they flew over the breathtaking city, Finn felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. They were inside the lion's den. One mistake, one slip of the tongue from Lyra, and it would all be over. The processing center was a sterile, efficient building. They were given clean clothes, hot food, and a small, monitored room. For 2 days, they were interviewed separately by polite but persistent officials. Finn stuck to his story, weaving in small, plausible details about his fictional life as a freighter pilot. Lyra, coached by him, was a shy, traumatized child who spoke little on the 3rd day. Their fragile safety net tore. Captain Thorn himself came to their room. He didn't sit. He stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small space. In his hand, he held a data pad. Your story is consistent, Mr. O'Connell, he began, his voice calm. Too consistent. My analysts have been unable to find any record of a freighter named the Star Dancer being lost in that sector. And your biometric profile? It's a perfect match for a mechanic named Finn O'Connell, who was reported missing from the outpost of Frosthold just before it was attacked by the hegemony. Finn's mouth went dry. He had no answer. Thorn stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Lyra's. He knelt down, his voice dropping to a gentle murmur. And you, little one, your eyes are a very unique color, a color I've only seen in one other place. He tapped his data pad, and an image appeared, a formal portrait of a regal, purple-skinned woman with white hair and amethyst eyes, standing beside a man who bore a striking resemblance to Lyra. The caption read, Her Royal Highness, Princess Serial of House Viril, and her consort, Lord Valerius. The hegemony didn't just lose a dissident, Thorn said, his voice now filled with a profound gravity. They lost the heir to the Virelian throne. Her mother was assassinated. Her father, a powerful noble who opposed the hegemony's expansion, has been missing for months. And you, child, are Princess Lyra Viril. Lyra's face crumpled. The weight of her secret, the fear, the grief, it all came crashing down. She burst into tears, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire small frame. Finn moved to comfort her, but Thorn held up a hand, stopping him. "I am not your enemy," Thorn said, his voice firm but not unkind. "The Concord has its treaties, but we also have our principles. The hegemony's claim on you is based on a lie, that your family were traitors. Our intelligence suggests the opposite, that they were heroes who tried to stop a war." He stood up, his decision made. "The hegemony has already filed a formal extradition request. They will be here within the hour to collect their asset. But I have a ship, the Dauntless, preparing for a deep-range patrol along the Perseus Arm. The captain is a friend of mine, a man who owes me a favor. He will take you to a place the hegemony's shadow cannot reach, a hidden colony founded by your father's allies." Hope, fierce and bright, flared in Finn's chest. "Where?" he asked. "The planet of Alara," Thorn said. "It's a long journey, and the path is dangerous, but it is your best chance." He looked at Lyra, his stern features softening. "Your father was a good man, Princess. He fought for a galaxy where a child wouldn't have to hide in the snow. It seems his legacy is in good hands." As they were smuggled out of the processing center and onto a waiting transport, Finn looked back at the gleaming city, a place of order and law that had just become their temporary salvation. He held Lyra's hand tightly, her small fingers gripping his with all her strength. They had escaped the snow, outwitted their hunters, and now had a new destination. But the galaxy was vast, and the hegemony was relentless. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time they weren't just running away. They were running towards something. A home, a future, and a destiny that was only just beginning to unfold. The journey to Alara was long and fraught with near misses, but the Dauntless's captain, a grizzled veteran named Rourke with a heart of gold, navigated the treacherous routes with skill. On Alara, they found not just a hidden colony, but a thriving sanctuary built by Lord Valerius's loyalists, who welcomed their lost princess with tears of joy. Finn, the humble mechanic, was no longer an outsider. He was hailed as her guardian, the man who'd saved their future queen from the ice. Lyra, safe at last, began to heal, her laughter returning as she learned of her heritage and her father's dream. Years passed. Finn never left her side, teaching her about engines and stars, while she taught him about courage and legacy. When she came of age, Princess Lyra Viral didn't just reclaim her throne. She rebuilt her world on the principles of peace her parents had died for.